Doomloopers, and welcome to another episode of the Doomloop Dispatch, the news show that covers the worst parts of the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm Kevin L. Jones. Not with me today is Scott Miller. He's actually sick, but we have been blessed, I tell you, with Lydia Bransten on the show today. She's the executive director of the Gubbio Project, a nonprofit that is, I guess, it embraces the harm reduction policies of Scandinavia to help people dealing with drug addiction and homelessness. How long has the Gubbio Project been around?
We are in our 21st year.
Oh my gosh. And
we're adults.
But it's in the Mission District in San Francisco. It provides, honestly, some really needed services in the area, but it's under a little attack, which is why we would have got onto this earlier, but we wanted to give it a break. We don't want the other side controlling the narrative. We want to control the narrative. So now that things have cooled down, hasn't been a protest in front of the Gubbio Project in a while. We're gonna have you on and talk. Well, thank you so much, Lydia, for coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to talk about what we do and maybe set some of the records straight.
Love it. That's exactly what you're here for. But first off, why don't you get into your story? How did you get involved with the Gubbio Project?
I have been working with people experiencing homelessness for the past 20 years. And I started when, I myself was having a life crisis, where I was in the process of getting a divorce. I hadn't worked in a while. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I started volunteering at St. Anthony's in their treatment program, which was an abstinence-based, social model treatment program. And at that time, I really understood addiction and treatment to be that kind of tried and true story of, people become addicted, they need to hit rock bottom. When they hit rock bottom, they decide to make a change, and then they have to embrace abstinence. And from embracing that abstinence, they will discover, a better life, reconnection with their families, and all of these hopes that people have. And while that is true for some people, for the vast majority of people, it's a much longer, more complicated story. And I have, over the past 20 years, really sort of adapted my view on how to approach the subject and the people who are experiencing addiction, homelessness, mental health issues. And when during the pandemic, I was still at St. Anthony's and I was running their dining room. And then they went through some changes, which just didn't align with me and my values that we're adapting. And so, I left the job, and I was on the board of the Gubbio Project, which at that time was in the Tenderloin was the primary site at St. Boniface. And then it had a smaller site at St. John's in the Mission. Because the Gubbio Project had to be closed for the pandemic because it was a congregate sleep site, and that wasn't something that we could do. We basically lost all of our staff, the executive director, everything shut down. Everyone had to find other ways to support themselves. And then, sort of as the pandemic as programs were starting to reopen post-pandemic, as the board of directors, there were a few of us left. We had a little bit of money. And then the question was, do we reopen? Because St. Boniface had decided to align with St. Anthony's, which made sense for them because they are a church that is not a wealthy parish. St. Anthony's certainly had deeper pockets to help, be able to support both the church and the program of letting people sleep in the church. And I wasn't employed. So I was like, well, let me go look at St. John's. And when I got there, the parish administrator was like, when are you coming back? And I looked at this amazing space, this beautiful church that has a gorgeous courtyard garden surrounded by trees and flowers and this parking lot, and I was like, wow, what we could do with this, right?
Yeah.
And here's a community of people, which are putting action into their words of saying, we want to accept folks who are experiencing homelessness, not just as a concept, but actually in our home. And that was like, after, the pandemic and all of those dark skies, you said at the beginning of this, the worst of San Francisco. Well, St. John's is the best of San Francisco, and I wanted to be a part of that. So, I went to the board and I said, look, I'd like to take this on. Give me a year. Let's see what we can do.
Great.
And there were so many possibilities out there, right? So Gubbio Project was always a sacred place for people to sleep. And post-pandemic, what was real was that the people coming to us had experienced an enormous amount of neglect during the pandemic. Those folks who were not accessible to like the SIP hotels and the rooms for people who were experiencing homelessness, those folks who were left on the street often didn't seek care from anyone until the coroner showed up, and that was the city response. And it's like, encampments grew, people gathered together because that's what we do as humans. We come together in times of crisis, and it looks different depending on what your situation is. And so for those of us who are in our homes, bored, experiencing our own form of trauma from not having like interactions with folks, the people who are living on the streets experiencing extreme poverty, addiction, were experiencing a different kind of trauma. And it was one of massive neglect, really hard time, any kind of congregate area where they could gather together, a dining room, a clothing program, a tech lab, an AA meeting. All of those programs were now virtual, or you get handed out the door. Well, if you're living on the street, you don't have access to a computer. You are basically isolated. Human beings are not isolationists at heart, so they gather together, thus encampments. And then post-pandemic, we woke up to like streets filled with tents and having to like be subjected to seeing the poverty, the trauma, the behaviors that are socially difficult for people. Seeing people suffering is hard on folks. It really is. I mean, at their best, I think people went from feeling an enormous amount of anxiety and pain to not being able to do anything about it, feeling anger.
Yes.
And so that's how Gubbio grew from being a sleep site for 17 years to what it is now, which is, a community program that includes all the kinds of services to really attend to the folks who have been neglected for years. And how do we rebuild that social construct to get people accustomed to the fact that there may be a different way now? Let's move you towards health, safety, and security. But that is not a one-day process.
Yes.
That was very long-winded. I'm so sorry.
No, that's great. But there's a lot of good stuff in there. And it's really worth pointing out that, yes, too. I mean, that's the thing. Even in San Francisco, liberal San Francisco, the poor are discarded, especially they just don't, they want to be out of sight, out of mind for a lot of people. And yeah, it was true. Like people got angry at the tents and everything. Just I think for seeing them, for being reminded of the disparities in our class system. I mean, and it is just that bad, and they just don't want to be reminded of it. But thank you, Gubbio Project, for being around. You guys serve between 120 and 150 people a day, 2,500 people a month. What are these people coming for? Like, what are the services that they're getting, and what are these? what are your, I would say, customers like, like his, everyone wants to make him out to be scary, especially there's a lot of paintbrushes being used in Berkeley. And I'm sorry for being long-winded myself, but in Berkeley, there's, one homeless encampment, and there was one guy accused of sexual harassment. And so the whole encampment got painted with that. So why don't, talk about what people are getting and who are the people you were seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to start off by saying, like, in people are people. And in the
Like
end,
Depeche Mode says.
right, now you're talking my era. And ultimately, we are all very much alike. I remember the first time I went to therapy, and I guess basically my therapist was like, "And you're in this box," and I'm like, I'm a unique individual. What do you mean I'm in that box? Do you mean all people going through this have these kinds of, but the reality is we're all so very similar. We want to be heard. We want to be cared about. We want to be seen, and we want to express ourselves. And under all of that, and we want to be safe, and under all of that, or above all of that, or whatever, what you see on the outside are all of the mechanisms that we create during our lives to keep ourselves as safe as possible. You know what I mean? And that shows up in different ways in people with different experiences. So when we talk about the trauma of someone who's walking out of their expensive home, that they work very hard to maintain in a very expensive city, and they see abject poverty, and they're horrified. That to me is as much a protection mechanism as the person who is wearing, 16 layers of clothing, smells really, really bad, and is using like what we call the skunk defense to basically keep themselves safe on the street so that people don't approach them. We have mechanisms as human beings to keep ourselves safe. So who are our guests? It's everybody. We have, the mission has, in the 8 square blocks around us, 1,000 units of SROs. Those are single occupancy hotel rooms that are small. They're like 8 by 10, maybe. Mm-hmm. They don't have a bathroom. They don't have a kitchen. These are not lockdown units. These are people's homes. And those people need to be outside in community. And for a lot of them, the Gubbio is a place to come and hang out, to have a cup of coffee, to talk to their friends, to sort of be a part of the community. We have people who are experiencing homelessness who are new to the streets, people who are just showing up, who are like, I'm new to the street. I got evicted. We had a couple of people that last week who had just recently been evicted, and they didn't know what to do. Those people are showing up. And then we have people who have long-term, like homelessness, people who have been on the streets for sometimes decades. And those folks show up as this is a safe place for them to come sleep. We have cots out. They're nice cots. I bought cots that, are wide and nice and easy to clean, so you can sleep there with your dog, or your partner, and feel safe. You can bring all your belongings in. You don't have to register at the door. You can stay for 30 minutes. You can stay for 12 hours. While you're there, you can get hygiene kits. You can use the bathroom. You can have a cup of coffee. We have nutritious snacks that range from like oatmeal in the morning to the other day. Our kitchen coordinator made French toast with fresh strawberries because we got a whole bunch of bread and we got a whole bunch of strawberries. And she was like, get me some maple syrup.
Nice.
Like, or stews. We have on-site 3 days a week street medicine or UCSF or the clinic consortium. So doctors, nurse practitioners, people who are there to be able to not just connect you to treatment, but also to start the process of looking at your body and how and what's going on with you in a way that gets you start to thinking about feeling better, feeling healthier, and connecting you to all of those services. Wound care is probably our biggest service that we do with our doctors, is that people come in, you hear a lot about this, of like people with these horrible wounds and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, in San Francisco, we have people with horrible wounds living on the street. Why?
Yeah.
Right? Why?
Yeah.
And so, getting those every time someone gets one of those wounds, healed at Gubbio Project, it saves the city about $5,000 in a hospital visit. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
We are able to get care to people who normally would not go to a hospital. And then you can ask the question of why. Why won't they go to the hospital? And we can get into that later.
Mm-hmm.
But so, and then we have harm reduction supplies, and harm reduction supplies are not only a way of keeping people safe. Our motto is safer today, stronger tomorrow. Because, onboarding additional diseases along with your addiction is just yet another barrier that we're putting up for people to be able to see a future for themselves, to able to, like, when they do choose to, like, change the modality of their lives, like, we want them to have as easy a path as possible. Dan Tsai from the Department of Public Health, who I think, I actually really like, because he's very straightforward. I can speak to him. I never saw Grant Koufax, not once, not ever. We may have some differing opinions about things, but we can have a conversation, and that's so key, right? He always says, like, we want to be able to roll out the red carpet for people so that when they're ready, and Gubbio Project, we are triaging people. So while some programs are working with people who are already contemplative, looking to make a change, the Gubbio Project, we're doing triage. We're at that very beginning step of, like, hey, and sometimes that starts with a cup of coffee.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, totally. And you also, I really like the point about in the beginning, when you were talking about how, people that buy nice houses, they just want to stay safe.
Mm-hmm.
But this is also too your clientele. They want to stay safe.
Oh, yeah.
And especially what people I've talked to that have worked with encampments, people like Tom Wolfe want to paint all of the homeless as drug addicts. That's a big thing. Everyone's a drug addict. When it seems to me, a lot of the times that people are on drugs is for safety. It's usually like speed or something to keep them up. How much of that do you find that it's like, honestly, is the drug issue as bad as they make it out to be? And honestly, is the observation I'm making that it's honestly not as bad? How true is that?
I think that, I have such different opinions about just the philosophy of life than many of the people in the opposite, in the camp that's pushing for, like, jailing people and then forcing them into treatment, based factually on the fact that, I certainly came from that frame of mind originally until I witnessed it not working over and over and over and over and over and over again, where it was like, so it while I think that it is a good option for some people, it is not the answer for everyone. And therefore we need to have more tools. But to get to your point about, all people experiencing homelessness are on the street because they were using drugs, is a misnomer. Many people who end up on the street did not start using drugs. They started using drugs when they got to the street. And you're correct. It is a survival tool. And, that speaks to a failure in our society and our policies, and not a failure necessarily in the individual who turned to drugs to be able to, like, stay up at night, be able to stay warm, to feel safe, to be a part of a community. it really talked, when I talked about neglect, I was like, that's where it starts. There's things like the fact that we know that kids who are in foster care have a 400% are going to be more likely to end up homeless. And yet, what have we done as a community, as a society, to look at that number and say, let's do preventative care? When we talk about, when people say, well, what should we do about housing? I'm like, stop evicting people. Right? Like,
Exactly.
let's just start with the basics. It's so much less expensive to be able to like keep someone in their home than it is to follow up, 2 years later when they're in the shelter system and they're really sick and now they're using drugs and blah, 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 blah. Right?
Yep.
But there's it's really hard to see the big picture for the average person. And I really do. I just want to say, when I say all these things, our street on Julian Street is a sort of a microcosm of the city itself. We have a church that's been there for 100 years. That's a fabulous, open LGBTQI church that is like, has been doing activism for decades. So since its inception, you know what I mean? And the doors are painted red because, in the 90s, they took in folks from El Salvador who were potentially going to be deported back to the war. In the 80s, they opened up the church to people experiencing the trauma of the AIDS pandemic and the fact that people were dying. The church at the garden at St. John's has 60 people from that era interned in the garden. So when we do gardening in the church, we add to the garden, but we never take away. Because, and Shanti comes and does their survivor dances there. And the creaks in the roof, we always say, it's the guys dancing, celebrating. It's a community that has always sort of been responsive to the people most in need in the community. Then we have a lot of, housing that is rent controlled housing. We have people who have lived in their apartments for 30 some years, who are a very diverse population of immigrants and long-term residents of the Mission. And then we have, new homeowners who have come in and purchased buildings, and, those buildings are now expensive and the rents are expensive, and, we have a hotel down the street that, the Kylish Hotel that I was just stunned that in Mission Local the other day, they did an article and they said, it's one of the more affordable places, one of the last affordable places on that street to live. And they were like, you can get a room for $1,800 a month. And I was like, $1,800 a month for a room in a flea bag hotel. And when I say it's a flea bag hotel, it is a flea bag hotel. You know what I mean? And I'm like, and our guests will come to us with horror stories of what happens in that hotel. So the perspective of the street is very dynamic, and it's hard to say, there are people who work 3 jobs to be able to maintain their apartment with their kid on Julian Street, who are coming out their door to people who are like smoking right in front of their door.
Yeah.
And, we have to find a way to navigate both people's lives. I'm not really interested in the opinions of the people who woke up post-pandemic and discovered that they're living on 16th and Mission, and now want it to be like something else. But, as I said the other day to city officials, I was like, we're doing our best to encourage people to come inside, but this is 16th and Mission. This street is not a gated community. And this district is not a sundown district. So people are going to be walking up and down the street, and there's some behaviors or some people that you might not want to encounter. But that's life in a big city, That said, to have someone post up on the street, like 10, 15 people all in one, like in front of one doorway, smoking fentanyl, leaving
Bending
food
over.
containers, bending over, you can't get out of your door. That's not acceptable either.
Yep.
And we're adults, and that's how I treat our community. I'm like, hey, we're adults. We make social contracts. Here's the deal. We're providing you with a safe space. We're providing you with tools that you need to get healthier and better in your being. We're providing you a place to sleep. And what we're asking you is to not here.
Yeah.
Right. And then the next question is always, then where? And that's what we haven't answered. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what we haven't answered. San Francisco is a small city, and all of those spaces where people used to hide in the cracks and crevices are gone.
Yes.
Someone told me the other day, give us our alleys back. And I was like, that's not the city you live in anymore.
Yep.
That's not the city you live in anymore.
Yeah. Man. Yeah, it's so sad too. So I used to work at KQED. I used to take Barden, so I would get off at 16th and Mission every day for work. And I remember when I first moved here, that was a no-go area. We're talking like 2002, 2003. Oh man, it's like a third world country. And then I started going there in 2014, and it wasn't that bad, but you'd have your tents and stuff. But I still understood this was like the Tenderloin, a historic area for kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say bad times, but a rougher clientele, a rougher residents in a sense, and but it was never as bad as people would make it out to be. And it's so funny to me too that now we're seeing these protests and stuff. We're seeing the Gubbio Project be the center of outrage, because God forbid you help people in need, and people come to you to get help. Where was I going with this? Well, but yeah, so it's like, I mean, how long has this been now? How long has the outrage been now? It seems a very recent phenomenon, and I want to see what your view of it has been.
Yeah, I mean, the outrage has gained traction.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reality. It's like there's this, I mean, to be really honest about it, harm reduction and harm reductionists, us, have not been able to articulate the story in a way that is acceptable for a lot of the population that isn't necessarily affected by or understands the dynamics of what's happening to people who are extremely poor and using drugs. We say that everyone in our community, everyone knows someone who has been affected by drugs. And that's true. But not everyone, and the voting class, has been affected by extreme poverty and homelessness. And when you put those two things together, you have a really complicated puzzle to untangle. Mm-hmm. And each individual person has their own puzzle. And so, when these policies that we put out there that are like these mass policies, abstinence only, in a city, just on the irony side, in a city that is calling itself an entertainment city and is increasing entertainment zones and saying that downtown's going to be like a party zone and it's going to be raves and parties and blah, and that, and I'm like, and on the other end of the coin, but if you're poor, don't be out there using drugs on the street.
Yeah.
And that in itself is a specious argument. I get that. That's me sort of like, pumping up a specious argument as well. It's different. Mm. But the reality is that the pressure that people experience is so intense that they're checking out, And when I look at people using fentanyl, back in my youth, I was someone who used heroin. And it was, it started as an experience that was exhilarating. I wanted to stay awake for that experience. It did not last long before it became a problem, right? And I
Yeah.
had to figure out something different. But I'm very lucky. But I look at folks today on fentanyl, and they are so checked out. They are so numbed. It's like, I feel like, I don't know if this is true or not. This is just my feeling about it, is that when the people I talk to are having such a hard time, that just being awake, just being conscious is painful. And the shuffling people around from here to there, not letting people settle, not letting people sleep, is painful for people. I often tell the story when I talk to folks who may not understand, this experience. I talk about, like, have you ever traveled and your plane got delayed, and you're in an airport and you're exhausted and no one's giving you any information, and you're sitting there getting angrier and angrier, and and then you see three people go up to the desk, and then one person is pounding and screaming. And then all of a sudden, all of us, rational, middle class, sensible people are now yelling and screaming and all that.
Yeah.
Snapping at our children, yelling at our spouses, like, imagine that being your life.
Totally. And that's, and what,
let's add on top of that, by the way, your wallet was stolen, you got no credit cards, there's no place for you.
Yes.
And then our expectation is like a reasonable response from people who are exhausted.
Yeah. And yeah, that's what kills me too, because it's like, for somehow the media, or at least there's been a narrative, is going back to dehumanizing these people. I mean, so much of it, like, it seems like just calling them all drug addicts is a great way to just kind of sweep them away and sweep away their personalities, and their situations. It's a way to dilute any nuance. And it just kills me too, because it just seems like all you're doing is caring about these people. And honestly, if, like always, if all these people that are complaining actually were there, and met these people, they probably have a different opinion. It's always like the Republican that actually supports LGBTQ rights is usually because they have a gay family member, like a gay daughter or something. And it seems like there's just this disconnect, especially too when you have people like Tom Wolfe saying, like, I was a junkie once, and you just got to treat these all like junkies, and giving the people the narrative that they want when they want to be so cruel and dismissive of their humanity. Now, one thing we've talked about that I was so interested by is that while you work in harm reduction, you are also okay with abstinence only. I mean, you have family members too that's what worked for them. Why? To me, it seems like if you attack one form of treatment, you're basically don't actually care about solving the problems. Because, I mean, yeah, sorry, go on. Yeah.
I think, again, I have an interesting perspective, because I came from the perspective that, once, despite the fact that, I'm not abstinence, and I did have a problematic use of drugs, like when I was young. And when I say I was young, I'm like between 16 and 19, right? But there is room for everyone in this conversation. What divides us, what ends up with like one person on this spectrum and one person on this spectrum and us fighting with each other, is public funding. We are all, it's like, okay, we want to look at how do we get people who are experiencing homelessness, who are on drugs, or who are having chaotic lives, are being put out of their homes, right?
Yeah.
End up on the street. How do we get these people off of the drugs and into, back into, into society functioning? And that in itself as a goal is misinterpreting the fact that for some of these folks, quite a few of them, they're going to need support their entire lives, because the drugs are in fact a medication that they're using because they have a whole lot of untreated, undiagnosed trauma, mental health issues, all kinds of life circumstances that have led them to this place, And so for me, it's not that abstinence is the wrong way. It's that any way that you say is the only way is the wrong way.
Yes.
That there are many, many roads and there are many, many outcomes. And recovery, what I really object to more than anything else is defining recovery as abstinence. Because my recovery was not abstinence.
Mm-hmm.
But I am no longer using heroin. I am no longer living in someone's basement. You know what I mean? I went back to school. I recovered from what could have potentially have killed me. Yeah. And other people's definition of recovery includes, there are people who they like to call themselves green and sober, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've given up the drugs that were, debilitating them, but now they smoke a little weed. Is that person in recovery? They have a job, they have a home, they're maintaining their, they have a life that fits in the box, right? Do you get to define that person's recovery? And so that's where we kind of hit this kind of philosophical kind of divide. I told you that I have a family member who said, that harm reduction saved their life. AA taught them how to live it.
Love it.
It's not one or the other.
Yes.
And for some people, like I'm a person who's had a lifelong struggle with my weight. It's humiliating. It's embarrassing. It's not, I'm not on the street smoking fentanyl, but sometimes I'm in the line buying ice cream in the middle of the night and I have diabetes. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. It's like, and if people, I get called out on social media all the time as being fat and this, that, now. How does she know about change people? She's just a fat, and and I'm like, and there's the part of me that shrinks and dies when I hear it. And then there's the other part of me like, fuck you. It ain't over till the fat lady sings and I'm not singing. And it's like, but the reality is like, Ozempic, which I got a prescription for, has really turned that around for me. Mm-hmm. Medicated assisted treatment.
Yeah. You can't do it without
and
something.
A lot of people have opinions about that. So whether someone needs Suboxone, methadone, counseling, community, it's every individual is going to have their own experience. And we want to embrace every choice that someone makes to make their life a little healthier, a little more stable. Because in the end, what's not acceptable is that we have people living on the streets in really squalid situations where they are sick, they are unsafe, they're at risk of dying. And we are traumatizing them further by shuffling them from one place to another. And at the same time, for the people who are working, living, raising children, walking their dogs in the communities where the streets are covered with people who experience this kind of poverty, it's devastating too. And how do we come together as a community to not villainize one or the other, but to say, like, the resources necessary to fix this are going to take a long time. It's not just San Francisco. This is a federal issue of housing, poverty, a changing economy, a lack of education, a lack of healthcare. People always ask me, like, if you had a magic wand. I'm like, we need national healthcare, period.
Yes.
Period. How many people, and why isn't mental health a part of our healthcare system?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if you are wealthy and you have an addiction to a drug, hundreds of thousands of dollars. You get psychiatrists, pharmaceutical psychiatrists to figure out, what's the drug, what's the mental health. That takes years to figure out. You get counselors, therapists, treatment programs. You tour your treatment program to see, is this where I want to be? Right? Like,
yes. And they're nice too, right? They're almost like resorts in many cases.
And then we're all like, no. We're going to take this person off. The thing they're going to do is they're going to start washing damn dishes. You know what I mean? Because they got to need to learn how to work. They got to learn how to work. And where they work? In the dish room. That's where they're going to work. You know what I mean? It's like, if they're going to vomit because they're, they'll put a bucket here. Come on, pull up your boots. I don't know another disease where that's the protocol.
Yeah.
Totally. And why is that the protocol? Because there's only given a short window in which they can recover before they are released back into the community, where it's sink or swim.
Yep.
87% of people relapse.
Understandably, especially when it's everywhere too. Like, you're expecting them to go out on their own, and if they don't have the right tools, or if they're just sensitive, they're set up to fail.
It's hard. It's hard out here for everyone. And, and for people who, feel like I did the right thing. I'm not on drugs. I'm not an alcoholic. I didn't, I've kept my job. I work really hard. I take care of my kids, they're like, why are these guys getting a free ride?
Yep.
And I'm like, would you like to swap positions with them? You can, live the life they're living to get, I don't see it as a free ride. People used to ask me when I was a dining room manager at St. Anthony's, we would get these people who would come, the volunteers, and a lot of corporate volunteers would ask, how many people are gaming the system? Coming in and getting a free meal, even though they can afford to buy one. And it so misses the point, right? Because I was like, this is a free meal that is for anyone. Anybody can enjoy this meal. Yeah. It happens that most of the people that are coming to get a free meal are experiencing poverty. And they're paying with their sweat equity. They're standing in a line for sometimes an hour to get that free meal. Right?
Yep.
And I was like, there is no gaming the system when you're saying this is a gift. This is an offering of generosity. But we don't think like that in this country so many times. It's about profit, it's about loss, and what are we gaining or what are we losing? And so you end up talking about this kind of work in a way of like, we save people $5,000 every time we, that is a powerful statement. It's also a really sad one.
Yeah, totally.
Right? That I have to be like, hey, we're saving you money by, treating this person with dignity.
Mm-hmm. But still, they're getting a free ride. I know it's that weird competitive, like, well, they can't get that if I'm not getting it. It's that same argument too with the forgiving student loans and stuff. Well, what if this person is actually rich and they're getting whatever, as long as everyone's student loans are forgiven, that's what matters to me. Yeah. And it's so funny too. Yeah, I really love that point too, of that you guys save thousands of dollars with your treatments and stuff, and there is a ton of money in this. Now, how much do you feel the politics surrounding this debate is actually kind of a fight for this money. I mean, you guys get what? You get 2.3 million a year from the city. I mean, does that make other nonprofits jealous?
Yeah, I know. And can I just say that for years, like 2.3, for years, we were operating on nothing. I mean, part of the success of our program is that we had nothing. You know, when you have nothing, you're feisty. It's like, oh, we need medical care. We can't pay for medical care. How are we going to get medical care? And I was like, let's contact the street team. Oh, UCSF is doing something with street medicine. Oh, let's invite them. And then when they came to our program, they're like, oh, all the people that we're trying to track down on the street are coming here.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, that works. It's better for us to be here because people know we'll be here. That's a place to meet, right? I would say 80% of our battle, like, you know, I do not want to waste my time arguing with the chatterboxes.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I was like, I'm not going to sit and talk, you know, to the people who are sitting, you know, like saying, oh, you know, harm reduction kills, blah, 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 back and forth and back and forth. I was like, have your opinions, enjoy them. You know, I feel for your heart, march on. But the working people, right? The people who are in this, really in it, doing the work, I respect them. Mm-hmm. We may differ in our opinions. There may be times that we're mad at each other. There's times where I'm like, bro, really? Like, what the hell? But in the end, I know that they care, right? I know that they care. I know that they're there. They're working with folks every day. They're seeing it. They're working with it. They are true believers, you know, and my goal is to make sure that we're connecting, because I want to know that if someone wants to go to abstinence-only treatment, that there's going to be a bed on the other side with a welcome hand. Then when we move them from Gubbio to whatever program they're going to, that we can get them there and that it's going to be a successful handoff, right? And at the same time, if there's someone who leaves treatment because they're not ready for it, we want them to hand them back to us. Mm-hmm. Right? So that they land in a safe place. So they're just not hitting that street hard, because your likelihood of overdosing in the first couple of days of going out of treatment goes up.
Yes.
Right? Because all of a sudden you have a lower threshold, you hit the street, you use, and then we see people die.
We have lost a lot of important people that way too. Famously, Will Shatter from Flipper. So that's my reference. But anyways, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I had a friend who was working as a chef at one of the treatment programs, and they had a table, and on the table they were putting pictures for Dia de los Muertos on the table of people who had passed away, and they kept it up. And he said they moved from one table to two tables. And then he said when he put up the third table, he's like, I can't do it anymore. Yeah. Right. And this is the part where, you know, these are the things that I don't want, you know, our fight over who gets funded for what to get in the way of, like, hey, we've got a guy who's leaving treatment. He's going to need support. Send him our way. We have a woman who isn't ready. Send him our way. Right. So we can, so they can have a soft landing. We can keep an eye on them and also try it and find out why that didn't work for them. These are conversations, right? Yes. Hey, you know, we don't start the conversation with like, have you ever thought of going to treatment? There isn't a person on the street who hasn't either been to treatment or been talked to about treatment, right? It's just this idea that it's like, oh, you should be talking to everyone about treatment. I was like, that's all people talk to them about.
Yes.
Right. So the second you say treatment, their ears go, and they're like, no, oh God, here goes another one. Fuck off. Okay, let's just have this conversation so you can get over it and I can get my bubble. We don't want that experience, which is why, you know, like I like to say we trade in yeses. You know, it's like, would you like a cup of coffee? Yes. Easy. Right. Mm-hmm. Would you like a snack? Yes. Easy. Hey, we have a guy here who's doing neck and shoulder massages today. Would you like a neck and shoulder massage? Oh, okay. Right. After that experience, it's like, hey, we've got nurses here from UCSF. They're doing vaccines. Have you been vaccinated? They're right here. Would you like that? You know what I mean? It's like slowly moving people to, like, people who come into our program often start conversations with, I can't have a hygiene kit, can I? Right? Like, hearing no over and over and over and over again to everything, right, is just, it sets up a mind frame. They come in combative. They come in ready to fight for that pair of socks, right?
Yeah, because that's probably what they're used to at that point too.
100%. So it takes people a while. And like I said, this is part of the social contract, right? It's like we are a community. We are not a community without boundaries. We, like, if someone comes in and uses in our site, we were like, that's not permitted here.
Yes.
We're going to ask you not to do that. And you're going to have to leave for the day. You can come back tomorrow, but we want you to know that that's not permitted here because that puts our program at risk. Would I love to have a supervised consumption site? 100%. But it's illegal right now. The government of San Francisco is not going to support it. The community won't support it where it is. It's not going to happen. I'm an adult. I understand the boundaries, right?
Yes.
What we're doing right now is the best that we can do in this moment for the folks that we're serving.
Yes.
And so it galls me again. It's like, this idea that people who work in harm reduction, who work with folks who use drugs, are all like these, like these raging anarchists who are just like, fuck the system, we'll do whatever the fuck we want, and everyone else can just, like, to hell with the neighbors. It's not what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But when we have a neighbor who comes up behind us when we're doing an overdose reversal and says, I hope they die and you run out of Narcan, which has happened, I'm like, that's not our issue.
Yeah.
That's your therapy issue. I'm like, bro, this is no longer about street conditions. This is about you and your mental health.
Yes. Yeah. Your anger issues.
100%. I was like, I went to a meeting where everyone was yelling and screaming. And I was like, I can sit here for an hour and you all can, like, let's get out a dunk tank. Right? Or we can have a conversation about how we can help make it better.
Yeah.
But this is what's not happening. We're not going away.
Yes. And that's the thing. It's just like, why isn't there more collaboration? Like, why you guys should be working with Salvation Army. There should be just like, it should be a whole, network, not this war. It should be a network. It should be everyone working together to solve the real issue.
It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. Good. I mean, I don't want to get into this conversation right now, but it's like, it has to happen.
Yeah. We
have to be working together. The funding is always going to be an issue. I feel like the powers that be, the people who hold the coin purse, are always going to keep us at different tables. And I'm like, enough of that. Enough. Because as long as we're fighting with each other and not together, we are working with the same people. And when people who misunderstand treatment programs say, oh, abstinence only for everyone, everywhere, and they're like, people use drugs in your site. I'm like, people use drugs in treatment programs.
Yeah.
People use drugs in treatment programs. That's what gets them put out of the treatment program. Just FYI. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because they broke the abstinence rule. That's the number one reason people get dismissed from treatment. Right?
Yeah.
People who are using drugs don't go to treatment. You have to be sober to be accepted into treatment.
Yeah.
Right? So, and the other good thing that's happening, and I think this is where, under Dan's leadership and Hillary Clinton's with DPH, is the addition, like, these abstinence programs are now including MAT, medically assisted treatment, and adapting to fentanyl is key to success. Fentanyl is a highly addictive, highly dangerous, very complex drug to come off of. Mm-hmm. And going cold turkey, old school, kind of like gut it out, you know, is not working.
Yeah.
It's too hard. It's too painful. People have been too, the drug has a hold of their brain in a way that is too complex, and so giving them the ability to have that time through medication to be able to sort of regain some rationality is really key. And it doesn't happen in jails and prisons. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I
Probably
mean,
not. Yeah.
do we want jails and prisons to take the place of clinical, like mental health facilities? If so, let's look at the way they look.
Yeah.
Right. And let's look at who is actually running them.
Yeah. We're like private companies, right?
And it's like, one of the folks who, is on the sidelines barking said to me, like, I want to see, because I was like, oh, okay, we're doing something wrong. What should we be doing? What do you want it to look like? And they were like, arrest all the drug dealers and deport them. And I'm like, all the drug dealers are not citizens? Or are we deporting citizens as well? I just want to be clear. I just want to make sure that I understand the level that you're talking about, like, because we're going to have to do some constitutional review and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, what about the people who are using? Arrest them all, force them into jail, and then abstinence only treatment. And they only come out when they're clean and sober.
Jesus Christ.
And I'm like, great. Okay. It's a plan. Fantastic. Could you operationalize that for me? Right? And then it's like, oh, now you're just trying to get, no, because, when I come up with a plan as a nonprofit serving folks who are experiencing homelessness and who use drugs, I have to actually come up with a plan.
Yeah.
An operational plan, a budget, who's going to staff it, where is it going to be, how many people is it going to be, how many beds? I mean, you're talking about there's 28,000 people who have addictive disorder in San Francisco?
Yeah.
Right. Or is this just the unhoused people?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's
right.
Kind of what I want to get at. Yeah.
When you say everybody who has, everyone who's using. Oh no, just the people who are using on the street. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay, got it.
Yeah. The people they have to look at, they don't want to.
But it's like, it is a very deep dive. And when people deep dive into what solutions look like, it's expensive. It's long term. It has to come from the feds as much as it from local politics and the state. It's about housing. It's about universal basic income. It's about the fact that there aren't enough jobs for folks anymore. Education is, I've got my kid in a public school in Oakland. Education needs some work. Yeah. There's a lot that leads to this.
Yeah.
And we keep catching babies, but no one's going upstream.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And and it's so funny too. You mentioned like, we'll just arrest all the drug dealers. Well, drug dealing's illegal. Like the cops should be doing this. Not, like what can they do more? Are you criticizing the cops right now?
It astonishes me every time someone says, well, do you want to arrest the drug dealers? I'm like, it's illegal.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I was like, it's like, we want more laws. I'm like, the laws are actually on the books.
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you. It's like, I'm not a cop. That is not my job.
Exactly.
But the work that we do is often with the same people, because cops are more involved now with quality of life issues than they're involved with like crime. Right?
Yeah.
And so it's confusing, I would imagine, for the cops as much as it is for us. Like if you talk to an individual cop, they'll roll their eyes right along with you. Be like, this is what I do. They don't want to be hustling people around the streets.
Yeah.
That's not, that wasn't their dream when they were like, I've been wanting to be a cop my whole life. It's like they have a vision in their mind that they're going after I don't know what they think, because I never wanted to be a cop. But I would imagine, it's not like being a meter maid for poor people on the street.
Yes.
Handing out tickets, you know, and moving people.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yes, exactly. Exactly. Well, this was fantastic, Lydia. Honestly, how can people support you? I mean, honestly, if you could make a pitch too to like what our viewers should be fighting for, I think that would be wonderful, but also how we can support you. Please let us know.
Yeah, I mean, I think what our viewers should be fighting for is like, you know, this is what I say to everyone. Like, we can't all do everything.
Mhm.
But when find something you really care about, and it may not be this issue, and dive deep into that particular thing. Find a program that speaks to you and volunteer there on a regular basis. You know, I was like, don't go and volunteer at a place where you're painting a wall. It's like, you know, on Monday it's green, Tuesday it's thing, because we got corporate groups coming in. We're going to keep painting this wall so they have something to do so we can have a volunteer experience. Like, volunteer, get out there, participate, get to know the population, get to know the issue that you're into. As far as Gubbio goes, we have a fundraiser coming up on the 12th. It's called a Build a Bus. It's on our website, thegubbioproject.org. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to buy a little pickup truck so that we can make sure that when someone says that they want to go to shelter, treatment, detox, methadone, pick up a prescription for Suboxone, that we have a way to get them there, because we lose people in transition. Right.
Yeah.
And so we want to, I'm sick of the word navigation. Navigation is giving someone a piece of paper often and sending them in that direction, right? Here's your map. Our folks actually need some more hand holding. So I'm calling it our doula program. We're going to walk with you through the entire process, know how much messy it is.
Love it.
Yeah. So if you want to contribute,
Just breathe.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And I had to tell myself that now, because we're all human.
Yeah,
Believe
yeah.
me, there are times where I'm like, good grief. But yeah, help us build that program.
Will do. This was great. Thank you everyone for tuning into this amazing episode. I'm definitely going to do more on harm reduction as well. And please support us on all the socials. Until next episode, keep fighting the good fight.